you've ever sat at a D&D table, tried to roleplay and just couldn't, this video is for you. There's a lot of great roleplay advice out there, with many techniques and tips. But I want to show you something deeper today. What's actually happening in your brain when you freeze up, and how understanding that makes roleplay easy. The problem is not really a lack of skill, but a mode your brain gets stuck in, that you can actually switch out of. I've been playing D&D for over 20 years, and today I'm going to break down why roleplaying feels so hard, how your brain hijacks your creativity, and how to fix it so you're finally able to roleplay like you always dreamed about. And to do this, we need to go back over 20 years ago, and I need to tell you about how I started playing D&D. I was about 10 years old, and I was terrified. My best friend's dad was a first edition veteran, and he had this legendary character that my friend would hear about as bedside stories he'd then retell me at school the next day. That's actually what got me into D&D in the first place. And so one day, my friend invited me over, and I got to sit down and play with this man, which as a result didn't feel casual to me. And I think most players actually have a version of this. Maybe it's not a friend's dad, but an actual play show, or just a really confident player at their first table. Most of us show up to that first game with a vision already in our heads of what good looks like. So, we were playing AD&D 2nd edition with reverse AC and everything. With me at the table, there was another kid, my friend, his dad, and a DM friend of his, both adults who'd been playing together for years. And watching them was honestly kind of intimidating, you know? I remember thinking that the barrier between my friend's dad and his character, or the DM and his NPC, was almost invisible. Everything just flowed, you know? But what I was seeing was the output from years of comfort, and I was comparing my inside feelings to their outside results. And I think that gap between what experienced players look like and what you feel like is where most of the anxiety around roleplaying actually comes from. So we started playing, and at some point we got ambushed by orcs in a forest. I was playing a ranger, I barely understood the rules, and my friend's dad described how he attacked and shouted at those orcs, looking extremely cool the entire time. And all I could think was, when it's gonna be my turn to talk, I'm going to sound ridiculous. So I froze. Not because I didn't know what my character would do, because I think I kinda did, but I just couldn't make myself say it out loud in a cool way. Psychologists call this the spotlight effect. We massively overestimate how much other people are looking at us. The other players at that table were mostly thinking about their own characters, but to me it didn't feel that way. At the time, I was sure everyone was just waiting for me to fail. And that feeling stayed with me for a while. All of these things point in the same direction, towards two modes your brain can be in when you're doing anything creative with other people. I will call them performance mode and play mode. Performance mode is when you're watching yourself, kind of editing before you speak. You're scanning the room for reactions, and in that mode, every sentence feels like a test. And play mode is the opposite. It's where you just respond and explore. The filter that was there in performance mode is not there anymore, and you're just in it. A researcher named Barbara Fredrickson found something that helped me understand this. When you're in a playful state, your brain literally opens up. There are more options available, more connections, and you're just more creative. But if your brain detects a threat, which is what performance mode is, your thinking narrows down. You get fewer ideas, and your responses get slower. And that's the whole problem. Shy D&D players aren't missing some secret skill, but I believe the conditions at the table pushed them into performance mode. And once you're there, it gets worse the harder you try. If you've ever left a session feeling exhausted, even though you thought nothing happened, this might be why. You're simply in a mode that made it cost 10 times more effort than it should have cost you. And the good news is, once you see it, it gets easier to notice what pushes you into performance mode. For example, it might be when the DM turns to you while the whole table watches and suddenly you're in that spotlight. Or when the floor is open and the fast talkers in the group just bounce off each other too quickly for you to react. For some people, it's because of the unspoken idea that real roleplay has to be first-person dialogue with a character voice. And if any of those made you frown a little, good, because we're gonna solve this in a second. But how? If the problem is this brain mode and not being shy, how do you switch back to the right mode? Let's go back to that childhood game, just after the orc ambush. I was still kinda nervous. After the combat, things got quieter, and we did some in-character campfire roleplay. Then I started to loosen up. I didn't suddenly get better, but I was able to because the pressure dropped after the combat, and the spotlight moved somewhere else. And the funny thing is, my ranger had an animal following him around. For some reason, 10-year-old me had chosen to buy a sheep with his character creation gold. I know it sounds weird, but I remember my thinking very clearly. I thought, because my character was a ranger, he loved animals. And because he was going to be sleeping outside in the rain, and sheep have wool, it just sounded warm and comfortable to sleep next to. And I remember that the veteran player and DM loved it. In a game like D&D that's full of optimal choices and combat, they saw this kid showing up with a sheep because it just seemed cozy. It was very impractical, but so sincere that it surprised them more than anything serious would have. So I started roleplaying my ranger just going to bed next to his sheep. And I was young, I was impressed and all that, but I think there was some pretty good roleplay. I wasn't doing any kind of crazy voice, but I was back in playing mode, and it's all that mattered. But just relax and play isn't really actionable advice, so the question we need to ask now is, how can you get into play mode on purpose? A psychologist named Ethan Cross studied something called self-distancing. It's quite a simple idea. When you step outside your own perspective, even just a little bit, anxiety drops and confidence goes up. And it turns out one of the most effective forms of self-distancing is adopting an alter ego. In one study, kids who pretended to be Batman during a difficult task showed significantly more perseverance than kids who didn't. You create a version of yourself you can step into when the real you becomes too exposed, and it just works. So when I read that, I thought, wait, that's what a D&D character already is. All the players at the table have already built their alter ego and have their very own Batman. And I think if you're shy and struggling to roleplay, you're just kind of fighting it instead of letting it take control. Instead of thinking, what should I say? You should be asking, what would they do? So I'd like you to try something. Before your next session, just take 5 minutes to write 3 sentences about your character. You do it in the third person. And this isn't going to be lines to reuse, but thoughts. For example, Kira is frustrated with the party's indecision. She thinks the rogue is hiding something, and she'd rather act than talk. It takes 5 minutes, but this is very important, because you're kind of preloading the self-distancing effect before you sit down and starting the shift from I need to perform to I'm thinking about what this person would do. Okay, so your character is preloaded in your head, and you're sitting at the table. The first scene starts. What do you actually do? To answer, I want to tell you about this woman. Her name is Viola Spolin, and she's basically the mother of modern improv. And she pretty much spent her whole career on one question. How do you get non-actors to be spontaneous? You know, the self-conscious people who overthink everything. Hi. And her answer was something she called the point of concentration. Every acting or improv exercise she designed had a specific problem built into it, concrete enough for the mind to focus on. What she discovered is that when the mind is busy solving a problem, it has a really hard time being self-conscious, because those two things compete for the same cognitive space. She described her exercises as artifices against artificiality, and I think it's a really cool line. So for D&D, this is very easy. Before any social scene, try to give yourself 2 things. One thing your character wants from this interaction, and also one thing they're trying to hide. Think of it as some kind of puzzle. How does Kira find out about the shipment without revealing she's investigating the merchant? This allows you to go from performing to problem solving, which switches you back to playing mode. And what people tend to not see coming is that prepping more can actually stop this from working. For example, if you're trying to write what your character might say in every possible scenario, you're trying to come up with a script that you structurally can never finish. And because that preparation never ends, the anxiety never goes away. So forget dialogue and spend more time on motivations. You should know what your character wants pretty well, and their words will just follow the intention. Of course, the character you build has a huge impact on how this feels. Clear motivation helps build that puzzle, and if your character is missing motivation, you go back to performance mode quickly. So if you want to make sure your next character is built for this, I actually put together a free guide called The 7 Deadly Sins of Character Creation. It covers the most common mistakes you should avoid when building a new character, and you can get it for free by clicking the link in the description. Alright, so we've covered this play mode and what to focus on once you're in it. But there's a belief you might struggle with that will undermine all of this if you don't address it. It's the idea that roleplay is binary. You have a choice, and you can either do the voice, act in first person all the time, etc., or you're not actually really role-playing at all. And I think this often comes from watching people who are, performers, like the amazing voice actors and pro improv comedians we see in the big actual plays. And because at most tables, we don't really take the time to stop and ask, what does roleplay actually mean for us? That polished pro version becomes the standard people think we should all strive for. But that's wrong. I think it's way more useful to think of roleplay as a dial instead of a switch. At one end of this dial, there's what we can call author stance. And it looks like Thorin would probably try to get a drink first. He's been through a lot, In author stance, you're basically just describing your character's state of mind and completely forget about acting and voices. But it's still roleplay. Then we move the dial a bit and end up in third-person narration land, which sounds like Thorin walks up to the bar and orders an ale, keeping his back to the door. Here we're focusing on actions instead of dialogue, and it's still roleplay. And then we have what I like to think of as novel style, where we're kind of describing the inner life of the character. And it sounds like Thorin leans forward and starts studying the map. He doesn't trust this wizard, but he needs the information, so he says, "Show me where the dragon was last seen." You drop into dialogue mode, but just sometimes, only when it feels right. And at the far, far, far end of the dial, we have full first-person in-character with a voice, etc., etc. The point is, all four are roleplay. And if you look at fiction in general, stepping outside of D&D for a second, you will notice that a lot of the deepest character work, like doubts and contradictions and conflicts, etc., is almost always out of dialogue. I think novel style is kind of the sweet spot for shy players. You narrate what your character is feeling, so you can really build a lot of depth, and you only talk when the planets align and you feel confident enough. 10-year-old Edariad with his sheep wasn't trying to go full voice actor mode. Even if I wasn't aware of it, I was in author mode, trying to describe what my character wanted, and it was memorable enough that my friend and I still remember it over 25 years later. So, if you've been thinking you need to sound like someone from Critical Role to be really role-playing, no you don't. Instead, just try to find your own sweet spot on this dial. Now, this is all great for players, but how do you get your DM to take this even further? If you're a shy player and feel misunderstood, timestamp this and share it with your DM. So, if you're a DM and your players are shy, I think the single biggest thing you can do is to stop running open floor social scenes. An example would be the party meets the merchant council and you just open the floor. So the confident players start bouncing off each other immediately, while the quiet players just sit there trying to think of something while the conversation moves way too quickly for them. You don't fix that by telling those shy players to speak up. Instead, I suggest you rethink the scene design. The party needs to convince a merchant council? Maybe you could try to have each character talk to a different council member, for example. The same thing could work in a full tavern. You try to distribute participation by modifying the structure instead of adding pressure. Also, the way you frame questions matters. Like, what do you say? Asks real-time creative performance from the players, which can be scary for shy people. But what's your character trying to accomplish here? Takes what's scary and transforms it to problem solving, aka play mode. Even using the character name instead of the player name can help. It's a small change, but all of these work together, and in the long run, it has a bigger impact than you might think. Also, if you've got a player who barely speaks during social scenes, but seems to transform into someone else during combat, that's a great opportunity. Combat has a clear structure with mechanics and defined turns, so the flow conditions are already kind of built in. So when that player starts describing their attacks and how they take down an enemy, etc., they're in play mode, inside a structure they feel safe in. The trick is to build on that. Don't try to push them into unstructured social scenes before they're ready, and instead just meet them where they are already playing. When I started to do some reading for this video, I found that introverts are actually more drawn to tabletop games than extroverts, which can feel a bit counterintuitive, but it makes sense when you consider that role-playing games offer something you don't find everywhere, which is structured social interaction. In a game like D&D, you have a role and rules, as well as your very own Batman or character to speak through. And this is a specific blend that's a lot less intimidating than many other social interactions for introverted people. So if you're the quiet person at the table, and you've played a few sessions, and have been feeling that this hobby isn't for you, you're wrong. I mean, probably, because this hobby was kind of made for you. My 10-year-old self picked a sheep as the animal following him around in his adventures, because wool seemed cozy in the rain. He had absolutely no idea what he was doing and just thought it sounded nice. I don't want to say it was the most memorable thing at the table that day, because it feels weirdly braggy and it's weird to brag about something you did as a 10-year-old, but yeah, I think it kind of was. So yeah, just stop trying to perform if that's not for you, and start playing. But now that you know how to enter play mode, the question becomes, what kind of character makes it easiest to stay there? And to answer this, click on this video next to learn how one simple question can make your character 10 times better.